in early childhood, IQ, let's say, is, 20% genetic and 80% social environment. But we should be educating not the children, but the freaking parents, excuse my French. The parents need to grow up. I don't think I'm going to believe that these under 16-year-olds are not consuming social media. When women marry, they are not only economically and, in terms of their longevity, disadvantaged by marriage. They are also disadvantaged by work. In all couples, the highest earner does far less homework, as in housework. If you look at a brain of somebody with schizophrenia, you can't say that person has schizophrenia and that person doesn't. Worst rates of depression in Italy and southern regions, but lowest rates of suicide in Italy and southern regions.
Is our generation less happy than, for example, your generation during your 20s?
Welcome to this episode. Did you know that 1 out of 6 Europeans have a mental health condition? We will today explore why this is and what can be done to address the situation. We are here accompanied by an expert on the subject. Thanks a lot, Kathryn, for being here.
That's a pleasure.
Please introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
I'm Kathryn Abel. I'm a professor of psychological medicine, so I'm a doctor, medic, and I'm called a clinical academic. So I do some clinical work, but I also mainly do research. Mm-hmm. And then I have another role, which is working for the government in the UK, and I co-chair something called the Mental Health Goals Programme, which I can talk about a little bit later. But essentially, I work in universities, in clinical settings, and in government, thinking about policy and programmes for mental health.
So it seems that you have a good combination between applied practice and research?
I think so, although a lot of the research I do is on populations where I don't look after clinically. So my main clinical work is schizophrenia, serious enduring mental illness. I've always worked with people with schizophrenia, whereas my research is more about parents, children, families, young people's mental health, and a little of prisons also.
And we'll be very happy to hear more about all these different types of your work. But maybe since you have such also a diverse background, I would say, how do you view currently overall the mental health situation in Europe? You practice, of course, in the UK, but for us, I think viewing these figures, 1 out of 6, it sounds incredibly high. How should we interpret this?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, some of the figures are even higher for Europe, 1 in 4, and for the UK, 1 in 3. Now, some of those refer to your lifetime likelihood of developing a mental illness, so your lifetime incidence. And of course, some people would say, well, that still means that 75% of the population, if it's 1 in 4, never experiences a mental illness. But you use the phrase a mental health condition. And of course, what we might talk about is that when people talk about their mental health, they use a whole range of different words and different language, and some of it's cultural and some of it's to do with their age. So young people use different sets of words. I hear the term, my least favorite is mental health issue. I have no idea what that is. And so when the reason I'm bringing this up now is because when you say 1 in 6 has a mental health condition, of course, it depends what you're referring to. Yeah. So that could be a survey of people who score on probable mental disorder because they score above a certain number of points at one time when they're asked a set of questions. Okay, and another person may look at health records in a hospital and say these are the people who turn up with a mental illness that's been diagnosed by their GP, their primary care doctor, or they turn up with self-harm or a suicide attempt, and then that is recorded as not mental illness but as a mental disorder of some kind. So these numbers are flexible depending on where the information comes from.
Yeah, because I think indeed you mentioned that you work with schizophrenia, that this is a mental illness. But for example, when we talk about anxiety or depression, these are like mental health. How would you define distress, and where you set the line between a mental illness and a situation of mental distress like anxiety?
So let's just sort of go back one step and just talk about what we really mean by mental health, I think. And so in some ways it's quite useful to think about physical health at the same time, because we know that when we feel physically ill, something's not working or something's painful. And usually we're suffering. So if you have an illness, there's this notion of suffering, and that's a subjective experience. And then there's the objective experience, which you can see, which is someone's limping, or they can't get up, or they're vomiting, or whatever it is. And so we have this real notion of, with illness, that it combines this subjective experience of suffering and then this objective notion of poor function. And when we talk about mental health, we talk about the same kinds of combinations of things. So it's referring, though, not to physical parameters, but to thoughts, emotions, how we interact socially, and how we function in society, and behaviours, therefore. And that is much more difficult, I think, to make binary.
Yeah, also because...
And to say one is functioning and one isn't. We may say they're functioning quite well on some days and not so well on other days. Now, you could have that with a physical illness, of course, but generally if somebody has heart failure or a broken leg, you know, it doesn't vary so much day to day. I mean...
Yeah, and I think they also go hand in hand, and it's something that is a bit disregarded, I would say, in public debate, that like physical health and mental health, they are also correlated.
Well, that's a whole new episode. The relationship between mental and physical health is something that, particularly in the girls' programme, we're very, very keen to think about. So just very quickly an aside, I worked for 10 years as the national lead in the UK for the National Institute of Health Research, and that helps to do clinical studies. So anybody who gets recruited into a clinical study for any condition, it could be for a new cancer drug, a new heart drug, whatever, and every year we would recruit about 1 million people. Okay, so there's a lot of people, and of that, about 90% were just for physical illnesses. And most of them were older populations because, of course, older people get more ill. And the really interesting thing was that none of those people was ever asked about their mental health at any stage in the study. And these are researchers. So we wanted to do one thing in the 10 years I was there, which was to have a standard core mental health data set that was placed in every physical study, so that we could start to understand that relationship. And the difficulty to try to get that, we're still in the process of trying to do that.
It's not easy.
But it's not easy. So one of the problems is everyone knows there is that link, but the information we have about it is very scattered, not systematic, and really quite poor, in my view, even though it clearly makes a difference to how well you do in terms of your heart attack, in terms of your heart surgery, any surgery, and in terms of your diabetes, chronic enduring, multiple long-term conditions. They're all very, very much linked to how good your mental health is.
Exactly, because like one point on physical health that I was reading recently, maybe it's wrong, you will correct me, but is that, for example, also anxiety has an impact not just on your nervous system, but also in your bones, on how properly your body functions, you know, like also the likelihood of developing illness, physical illness, if you live a life that is very much filled with anxiety, it skyrockets.
It's so tricky, that, because if you're saying that the causal agent is the anxiety itself, then you may say biologically we must look at the stress axis, because anxiety is embodied through the adrenal glands, the hypothalamus, the stress axis, if you like. So you say then that would be really great, we can do something which modifies the stress axis. But what you find is these kinds of associations are what we call confounded. And that means there are unmeasured elements that may be causal in the pathway. For example, somebody who's anxious may also be somebody who lives in poverty, has high levels of a nasty job, and so they have very poor lifestyle, poor sleep. They may be somebody who works at night. It may be that they had abuse as a child. I mean, there's so many other elements that are not the anxiety itself, but that are related to both the anxiety, the exposure we call it, and the outcome, the physical health.
No, for sure. But what I was thinking is that, like, if in public debate you do not consider the impact that anxiety as well as on your body, like in the sense that sometimes it's like seen as anxiety, you have it and then you need to just don't think about it and those kind of things, but you really should address.
Absolutely. And so what we want to do, for example, I'll give you a very simple example, which is very common across Europe, which is people who turn up to, I don't know what you call it here, emergency departments in America. A&E, accident and emergency, we call it. I don't know what you call it.
Pronto soccorso, how do you say that?
Pronto soccorso, it's okay.
So on a Saturday night.
With the other word I was struggling.
So, a huge number of people who come to emergency departments across the world, and particularly where there are high rates of heart disease, are turning up with what they call cardiac pain. They think it's their heart. The majority of those people doesn't end up having, when they do all the heart tests and the blood tests and the da-da-da, and they wait for hours to get the results, they don't have cardiac pain. Okay. They're not having a heart attack. Yeah. Now, clearly, we should be asking about anxiety.
Yes.
We should be asking about the stressors that cause them to have, if it's, I don't know, a cause in your stomach that gives you pain here, heartburn, we call it, or just anxiety, which makes you feel panicky, and your heart goes like this, and you're frightened, and you develop symptoms of shortness of breath, and you think, I'm having a heart attack, I'm going to die. Now, we don't look at those, but 200 people every fortnight turn up to these, and the majority does not have cardiac pain. And then we just let them go away. And we're not looking, so they're going to come back. We're not looking at these people. It's an easy, you'd think it would be low-hanging fruit, to make that link. And it's common across,
I'm also curious about something you said before, which I thought was very interesting. Basically, your attempt to put psychological or mental considerations into mainstream medicine or into mainstream service. Can you tell us a bit about your personal experience of trying to do this over the last decade?
So we were mainly starting to work with researchers. Okay, so we wanted to have people who were doing physical studies, and they were research nurses usually. And we did lots of work to develop this and to try to work out the methodology to pilot this. So we spoke to lots of people who would be taking the tool. It was on an iPad. They fill it in. It's a standardized questionnaire used by the European Union, used by many, many people. There are two things for anxiety and depression, really, the commonest things. And they are so much more common than other mental illnesses. So, or just symptom load. We wanted to see a continuum, because actually the continuum would be important rather than a threshold for diagnosis. So, the main concern for them was if somebody says they tick in the PH9, it's a questionnaire with 9 questions. If they tick, I feel suicidal or I feel very unhappy, they were terrified because they don't work in mental health and they're not trained.
They wouldn't know what
scared.
to do.
So it's about risk aversion. They don't want to have the responsibility. It doesn't matter if you say it's not your responsibility. There's a clear pathway. If somebody says they feel suicidal, it's easy, particularly in the UK. You go straight to the GP. You just let the GP know. They take it up. It's not a problem. But there is so much risk aversion with mental health symptoms generally. People are scared. And they're scared for all sorts of different reasons of using the data here or asking about things. They talk about it's like the old, I'm a very old feminist. And when I started work, nobody would ask about domestic violence or sexual abuse because guess what? If you ask about it, they may tell you. That's terrifying. And then what do I do?
But did you see this then after these initial experiences
so
developing a lot?
We are also, it was very unlucky. It was just around the pandemic that we were trying to get this. Everyone was
it's not great.
terrified about everything. And now we are just about to start placing this in Manchester's Royal Infirmary.
Okay.
Which is a huge, very busy, can you imagine, after the Games,
Of course.
Yeah.
With Manchester.
It's very, very busy.
Clubs,
and most of it is not with physical health problems as such. It's more bad behaviour. Anyway, so it's a very, very busy A&E. And we have managed to convince them that if we help them to triage people who come with cardiac pain, or indeed other kinds of things that could have a big psychological component, we're not saying people aren't really having these symptoms. It's just that the cause isn't a heart attack or something else. It could be another reason. Anyway, so we've just managed to convince them to take this. So hopefully sometime next year this study will start and will show that it's a very useful way of just screening who you really... Because also one thing we may talk about is particularly with relation to children. There are so many more children coming with mental health symptoms that there becomes a problem if you have a limited number of trains and a platform, then and they're only going to A or B, the trains, then if too many people get on the platform, the people who need to go to A never get on the train. And that's the same with services. If they're inundated with people who don't really need to go there, then the people who really need to go there never get on the train and get treatment, or it's delayed. So
and how do you do this screening, for example, now, like yourself?
I mean, so for the screening for just... So it's not... I mean, we must be careful here. This isn't really screening. Screening is a very specific technical word, which means that you have a very specific condition that you're looking for, but you're actively looking for it. People aren't coming to you like prostate cancer. And you know that there's a threshold of a certain measurement above which it's screened positive. But with any screening, there are false positives and false negatives. The more people who come, the more false positives, and sometimes the more false negatives, depending on your instrument. But how do we do this we have developed this core mental health data set to ask this set of questions. And the reason that we've chosen the questions is that we've done a huge amount of work with many, many people across many countries. And these questions work very well. They're very stable, robust. They have robust psychometric properties. So they're quite good at picking up when there's some problem that needs treating or a problem which may just need monitoring and not treating.
And here you mentioned a very interesting point also before that, like there is risk aversion concerning mental health. But this, of course, in my opinion, exacerbates the problems because also negative emotion like anxiety and depression are still like signals, that the brain give to the body, and it's also something that can be also helpful to some extent because it's signaling that something is not functioning.
So I think you're talking about distress, maybe, or anxiety. I would say depression we should put to one side because depression means something. It's a clinical syndrome that usually requires some treatment. Sometimes it will go away on its own if it's mild. But otherwise, but you're quite right. And of course, you could say that a lot of these psychological symptoms, distress, anxiety, are adaptive and they're not maladaptive. They are appropriate for the context. So if somebody has been in a war or a disaster or somebody's beaten them up or they've been in a car crash, they could feel very distressed and anxious. And the way in which somebody copes with that, individually or in the society, is a marker really of health. So it's healthy for us. And of course, we know about this, the bell-shaped curve of, we have bodies that are set up to take distress and stress, and that the more stress you give the system, the better it functions. Like exams, the whole exam thing. And then above a certain level, the function starts to drop.
Like for taxation.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I don't know that there's a lot of criticism about the taxation. There's a lot of criticism about the taxation theories. So let's leave them to one side. But so, and that curve like that, the bell-shaped curve, for each individual, it may be shifted to the right. They can take far more stress until it falls off, or to the left, they can take very little until the function falls off. And in some senses, that's quite a good way of thinking about mental health. So it's your capacity, where you are on that curve, your capacity to cope with stress. And then we get to really interesting things that we know about what makes you more or less likely to be at this end. You can take a lot of stress and you perform very well. You know, give a busy person a job. Yeah. Or the other end, you can't take very much stress. And of course, one of the things we know is IQ. So people, not if you're autistic with high IQ, but generally people with higher IQ can deal with much more stress. Probably they just come up with more alternatives about how to cope, strategies to solve problems. And that's very satisfying. So great, they feel good and they get on and they think they can do more. And so we know IQ is one thing, but also just educational level. Deprivation, socioeconomic deprivation. And, you know, then there are all sorts of other things like adversity in childhood. So
of course.
Very early bad experiences make it, for most people, will provide all sorts of difficulties with coping subsequently. And that's where you see, you know, young girls who've been sexually abused developing addictions and all sorts of maladaptive behaviors in adolescence.
But from these possible causes you now mentioned, which may determine the level of mental health, so IQ, education, the socioeconomic background, childhood experiences, it seems that most of those can be influenced, maybe IQ not, but all the rest could by policy or by civil society, by professionals. So I would say that this is an overall positive conclusion. No, it means that you have an influence.
Even more than that, IQ can be. So when you're born, IQ is, I'm going to exaggerate just for the point, but in early childhood, IQ, let's say, is, you know, 20% genetic and 80% social environment.
Oh, wow.
And by the time you get to adolescence, it's the other way around. So what you see is that you can measure cognitive function even in infants. There are cognitive measures that allow you to predict IQ. And if you look at groups of children who in infancy have high cognitive scores in low social class, high cognitive scores in high social class, and then the opposite, low cognitive scores, low social class, low cognitive scores, high social class. If you follow the children in high social class, the high social class, high cognitive do the best. So over childhood, they do really well in school, they do really well, they go to university, whatever. Then you get the similarly high cognitive infants, but in low social class, they go down over childhood. And they go to meet the high social class, low cognitive infants who go up to meet them.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then the low cognitive, low social class stay at the bottom the whole way along. So that's the sort of modifiable bit. And that is probably because of all of the additional supports that I was going to say the children have. But what I really now know after 45 years in the business is that these effects are likely to be to do with what you do for the families. And what I really mean, what I really mean by that is the support the mother, and I'm talking about women, specifically women in heterosexual couples, and we can talk about why I'm specifying that, because they are overburdened, women in heterosexual couples, particularly if they have children. And so there are very few resources left over to support the child in schoolwork, in, I don't know, nutrition, in daily routine that allows them to get to school with their right kit and a breakfast inside them. All of these things to be able to take advantage of after school things and extra this and extra that, to go on holidays and be stimulated by lots of, you know, all of that stuff. And that's what we're seeing in the middle.
And that's very interesting because I think the link between like childhood life and long-term mental health, like condition, is crucial, and it's something I think is a bit overseen. It's not so much seen how important this is, like having, for example, an healthy childhood with having a good long-term mental health condition, in the sense like quite of stability from a mental health perspective. And just one point that was very interesting, you mentioned IQ and development of cognitive functioning. What are, if you would say, the most important factors? Like, is it nutrition? Is it reading books? Is it school attendance? What develops IQ most, if you could say some aspects? or sport.
Oh, you mean of the non-genetic aspects,
the non-genetic,
modifiable aspects?
Exactly.
I mean, look, I don't really know the answer to that. I'm not sure anybody does, because most of these things we find, I mean, it's partly a data problem. The way these things are measured over childhood, I mean, then they're very crudely measured. So if you look at even really good data sets from the European Commission or OECD or WHO or even Scandinavian or UK, we have fantastic data sets. Most European countries don't. But, you know, even there, the measures of socioeconomic status, until the 80s, it was your father's education or your father's occupation, one of those two. Now we can include maternal education as well, which makes a much bigger difference than paternal education. And, you know, so all of these different things, we can look at household income now in Scandinavia, but most of them are looked at on a one-off cross-sectional. We just look at it once, and then we say that is the marker of socioeconomic status. People who tried to look at this, really good social scientists, so there's funny things about smoking, for example. Smoking used to be a very poor marker of socioeconomic status because everybody smoked, particularly in more south or, you know, Germany or in Holland. I mean, terrible smoke. Italians, terrible smokers. Still, you know, still. But you understand what I'm saying. Everybody smoked. It was independent of social class. And gradually, from the sort of 50s onwards, we've seen that it's become quite a good marker of social class. And of course, it's lower social class people, more women, young women smoking, and lower social class. And so it's a better marker. And of course, there's some funny work which shows that people of higher social class tend to lie about smoking, which is hilarious.
So they're ashamed.
They're ashamed, because it's like terrible. Anyway, it is
maybe
terrible.
because it's also associated with a social class, which
well, of course, absolutely. It's like absolutely, it's become a kind of marker of you know, poor education or whatever. Anyway, so
Theo smokes.
but are you a smoker?
No,
I didn't. You didn't. Yeah.
he just likes to tease me.
So I think the thing is that you know, there are lots of different things. You know, we talk a lot about, I have worked a lot on something called maternal effects, which is the health of the mother, preconception and during pregnancy, because that influences development of the child, brain development of the stress axis, blah, blah, blah. And we thought there was so much, you know, it was so important, the pregnancy and all of this. But actually, the fetus is unbelievably robust. You can do a lot to the fetus. You can't drink very much alcohol before you get fetal alcohol syndrome. Smoking causes lighter babies. That's the joke. But, you know, there are not many things. You need to take folic acid, and you need to have vitamin D if you're a migrant living in Europe.
Okay. Used.
But there are mainly good. I mean, we're so pale, it doesn't matter. But there are not many things. You know, there's a huge range of behaviours that can be tolerated for a healthy fetus, healthy pregnancy. It's remarkable. So, and, you know, in some ways that's disappointing because we want these things, these are modifiable things. We can, you know, tell women more often what to do than we already have done. So, like, you know, JFK Jr., RFK Jr. and Trump are telling women not to take paracetamol. It's just ridiculous. It's rubbish. Anyway, so I guess one of the things about particularly those fetal origin ideas is that it forgets about the rest of childhood. And as I said to you, by the time the child gets to adolescence, if you want to understand, your question was what causes IQ, what's the
what can influence it?
Apart from genetics.
Yeah, exactly.
By the time they get to adolescence, it's pretty much that's what it's going to be. So it's by then it's 80% plus genetic. You can't. It's unmodifiable.
That's super interesting.
So what do we think? We think an averagely healthy childhood with parents who don't abuse you or neglect you, and you have an averagely good diet, and you have an average amount of exercise and sunlight, and etc. etc. So, you know, humans are robust. We've evolved to survive the environment in which we now live. So it's difficult to, you know, and the other thing about IQ, when you say how modifiable is it, it's normally distributed. So the shape of IQ in any population is the same. It's the same in a population of people with schizophrenia. It's still that shape. It's just shifted to the left.
Yes, okay, interesting.
So these are what we call evolutionary stable traits, are the same with height, birth weight, IQ, all of these kinds of things. In general, if you don't think about sort of female genocide, the sex ratio in populations is about the same. It's about slightly more boys are born, even more boys are conceived, then slightly more are born, slightly more boys are lost during pregnancy, and then by the time you get to sort of mid-childhood, it's about the equal sex ratio.
Okay.
So, these things are very stable. So when we do have the opportunity in childhood to influence IQ, by doing just what you can imagine.
Super interesting. Okay.
There are lots of people have relatively small studies that show reading to your child or this, that, or the other exposure, but they're all problematic, these, because they haven't measured lots of unmeasured confounding that we don't know about.
Yeah.
I'm curious to come back to something you said before about the importance of maternal health, but also maternal education, the time and the care she has in a heterosexual relationship. So you said you offered to specify why it's particular to women, and I'm curious.
Okay, so we're really moving off the well, kind of. So there is a terrible phenomenon that I think is really underplayed. You're interested in policy and things we can do to move Europe forward.
Yeah.
For me, the one thing that would make a big difference is if we properly managed, or had properly managed in the mid-20th century, the extraordinary demographic, sociological shift of women into the paid workplace. And what we now see is that there's been an increase steadily in all populations, even in very traditional populations, not in Western Europe or the US or Australia. We've seen a shift of women into the workplace. And you would imagine that shift would have a corollary in the home. But we've seen no change in the amount of work that men do in the home. And even in and exclusively in heterosexual couples where the woman is the high earner. So in all couples, the highest earner, except in heterosexual couples where the woman is the highest earner, in all couples, the highest earner does far less homework, as in housework. And it's not just about childcare. This is not explained by pregnancy, breastfeeding, maternal care in the first 2 years of life, which may be more understandable. This is literally about cooking and cleaning. So this is a huge problem for women. And when women marry, they are not only economically and, in terms of their longevity, disadvantaged by marriage, they are also disadvantaged by work, by the increase in work. So when heterosexual women, particularly higher earner in the couple, divorce, actually their economic burden reduces and they are relatively more wealthy in terms of the time they have for leisure or pursuing more paid work if they so wish.
And how does this then, to come back to the mental health issue, is the thesis, let's say, or the argument that the fact that women in marriages may have less time today for their kids then negatively impacts potentially the mental health development of the kid?
So, in a nutshell, and this is, I'm writing about this at the moment, this is not out there, as it were, but I believe the single most important reason we're seeing so much, particularly, we can talk about the specifics of what we're seeing, but this is happening not just across Europe, where we've got very good data, but anywhere that we see these data, it's young women who are developing common mental disorder, anxiety disorders, mood disorders. Depending where you look, there's more anxiety or mood, increasing rates of self-harm, etc., etc. Particularly white young women, and lots of more ADD diagnoses in white middle-class young women.
ADD?
attention deficit disorder.
Okay.
So these are the neurodevelopmental,
Okay.
neurospicy, neurodiverse type,
Okay. Yes.
phenomena. And the class and the ethnicity intersections are very interesting. We can talk about those in a bit more. But my view is that this is in large part because I am not somebody who wants to blame women, and I am not trying to blame women. I'm blaming society, who has not compensated women for the huge additional burden they have had moving into the workplace, into the paid workplace. And that is that women are highly anxious. So when you look at rates of maternal mental illness, the trends, we have looked at this with part of my European Research Council work, are extraordinary. The rates of particularly anxiety disorder it's usually diagnosed as anxiety disorders in the Scandinavian data, and in the UK data as mood disorders, low mood, etc. in mothers. Yeah. And I mean, it's a joke. We say, having children's bad for your mental health, for the women. And I think if you have anxious, depressed mothers who are guilty about the time they're unable to spend at work, they take time off to have their children, they lose out at work, we can talk about what men do as well, and then they're guilty in the home because they're not there enough, they're exhausted, they can't do anything right. Women tend to want to do things, they're very kind of high, whatever. And my understanding, my view is that is what we call in the analytic world projectively identified in the children. So the young girls become anxious as a result of family anxiety, and I would suggest it's not just I would suggest, the data show that the maternal effects in terms of maternal anxiety versus paternal are much greater. If you look at what happens then to the children, it's much greater. So we say, the child is the problem, the child's got to have medication. And guess what? Young women are increasingly being medicated with psychoactive drugs, even antipsychotic drugs.
But so the maternal health has a stronger impact than paternal health on
maternal mental health.
And do you think that the effect would be equally true if men did more housework and spent more time at home?
So it's a super interesting question about whether they would, because we can talk about gender differences, and I absolutely agree that there are differences in help-seeking behaviour by men. And some people say that the solution to that is we must educate men to come and think of themselves as having a symptom. You need help, guys. You really need some help. That's not really my experience. I've got sons, but it is my experience that they just don't feel quite so anxious or worried about the world. They just are slightly, and we know, the gender differences in this is part of my work for many years in the Centre for Women's Mental Health. We are one of the few people who's consistently reported on sex differences in all the data. Everywhere you go, men have lower rates of common mental disorder and higher rates of suicide.
Exactly.
Everywhere you go. And the ratios are pretty consistent.
And here I think it's very interesting because you mentioned anxiety, like on average, is larger and higher on women. But suicide rates, according to the data we look at, 75% of suicides are done by men. So why is that?
Nobody knows the answer to that. There are lots of really interesting theories that men enact violence to others and violence themselves. We wrote a paper called Women Who Kill once, simply because women don't kill very often.
Because also in prison the share of men among prisoners.
It is huge amounts. We have about 90,000 people in prison in the UK. It's the highest in Europe per capita population. We only have 5,000 at any one time women in prison. And actually, I was involved in work over 10 years ago suggesting we should close women's prisons because these are non-violent, tiny minority of very personality disorder women, like the young woman who's been put in jail for killing babies recently. And Rosemary West and various things. But they're tiny, very rare. Now, of course, the other thing to say is that it's an awful thing. It's the worst possible outcome. Suicide, I think it's worse than any other kind of death. It's young people, often, usually. But it's rare. So the average rate in the EU, I think, at the moment is about 3.5 per 100,000. And that's something called the age standardized rate. So it takes account of what the age structure of the particular population is at the time, so that you can then compare between different populations. Yeah. So that standardization allows you to compare between different populations or different cohorts over time. Mm. So you can say whether, the age standardized Belgian rate of suicide is in 1990 is the same as in 2020, let's say. Mm-hmm. And in fact, what Europe has seen is a steady decline in suicide in women and men.
But here I also think that one impact of it is mental health awareness, because you can correct me, but I also believe that one share of this suicide is also due to the fact that among male population, mental health is a stigma. So you do not share your emotional state, even in a case of a depression or high anxiety.
I absolutely agree with you
among
that
your peers.
There's a role for better education and for helping young men in distress. I absolutely agree with you. What I think the question though is if you were to do that, could you get rid of this either the suicide rate at all? Would you have a big influence on it, or could you get rid of the sex ratio? I'm not sure you could get rid of the sex ratio. Mm-hmm. And the other, of course, really interesting thing, if you remember, we've just said that women, and they're women technically, but they're sort of 13 to 15, they're just post-puberty. Mm-hmm. And that's where you see this massive change in that young women becoming depressed and anxious, and young men not, compared to young women. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that adolescence is the time that mental illness starts for women and men. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that big sex difference really in mental disorders, and I'm not talking about neurodevelopmental disorders because it's the other way around it's in childhood. That's when it starts. Yeah,
because indeed, mentioning adolescence, we were also looking at like around half of mental illness, you see the symptoms before 18. So also here, like from a policy perspective, like what could be like the risk signals of a developing mental illness that population should know more?
So we've already talked about a lot of those. Yeah. And, one of the things that many demographers will say is that by the time you're born, many of your life outcomes are already determined. No. And a part of that is to do with things like social class. Yeah. How lucky are we to have the parents we have or not? Who are going to treat you well, who are educated themselves, who had very healthy birth weights. Yeah. Your birth weight is more related to your maternal grandmother's birth weight than it is to your father's birth weight. So this is about an intergenerational phenomena of it's not good luck. It's not hard work and clever. It's good luck where you're born and who you're born to. Yeah. So a lot of those things we already know. Mm-hmm. And then when you come into things into adolescence, what's happened then in childhood, we've talked about. So we know that, poverty and all of the things you're born into are one element. If there's no change in the socioeconomic circumstances, so you remain poor, that just remains as a risk factor.
Yeah, but for example, like talking about personality disorders, like, I don't know, bipolar disorder, borderline.
Like, bipolar isn't personality, but we can come on to
that. Okay, sorry. But can you, correct, in the sense if it's before 18, do you have a chance of avoiding this being a long-term condition, for example, if you talk about borderline or...
So it's personality disorders are a whole nother big bucket of problems.
Which is cool. Okay.
So it's a very interesting time for personality disorders. It is not my area of expertise. There are lots of people who know far more about it than I do. All I can tell you is it's a very interesting time right now because there's an awful lot of... There was a time, I think, in the 90s where diagnosis was really important and taking hold with the ICD, the International Classification of Diseases from the WHO, which is what European countries all use for diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And, it really became entrenched within that, a series of personality disorders. And that was fantastically clinically helpful because we were definitely seeing patterns of behavior, particularly in adolescence, emerging that were so out of the ordinary, and they were not psychosis, although some of them were called borderline, and that's borderline personality disorder. They were not depression as such, but they really had atavistic, odd components, but they were consistently seen in groups of people. And then what we saw is when you gathered these groups who looked similar in a diagnostic framework, then they had risk factors, so sexual abuse in childhood, physical abuse, neglect, those kinds of things.
But is it too late at that moment, like when you identify this risk signal, the personality disorder? I understand it's not your field, but is it already too late for the brain to correct in brackets this disorder? Or you can...
I couldn't work if I thought it was too late. But I suppose what I would say is that, when we talk about risk, generally we talk about, can we pick up, we have risk algorithms, can we, because we don't know who's in front of us, we don't know what's going to happen to them. So the majority, remember we flipped it at the beginning, the majority of people who have bad experiences, whether you're in the Zeebrugge disaster or, whatever, the majority of those people did not develop post-traumatic stress disorder. The extraordinary thing is the resilience of both children and humans generally. And it may be that they're not happy in their lives, but it may be that they don't develop these appallingly destructive behavioral disorders known as the personality disorders, destructive either to themselves or others, so repeated self-harm, alcoholism, drug abuse, combinations of the three,
And then from a policy perspective, what would you concretely do, for example, if
for personality disorder?
No, in general.
I'm not the person to ask.
No, in general, I was saying, if you see this risk factor in adolescence, awareness, what can politicians do?
You've answered your own question, I think, by asking these series of questions. And, I guess you won't be surprised to hear that I would say we need to stop focusing on the children and them being the problem, and we need to start focusing on
the parents,
the family, and the parents. So if we just say the parents, it becomes problematic, I think. If we think about the family, then we're much more thinking about all of that. So, one of the really interesting things we found in the child and adolescent mental health trends in the UK, but elsewhere too, is this ethnicity difference. So it's the white population and the mixed race population who are having these really big increases in presentation of problems, of mental health problems, symptoms. And it's not the black population, often living in poverty, or in the UK, the South Asian population. So we have it's very, very mixed. The UK is big populations of South Asians from our glorious, like your glorious, actually not your Italian. Actually, Italians did have an empire, but we had a huge empire. Anyway.
Okay, but interesting. But do you have an explanation, or at least I
guess?
Yes.
So this relates to the point about the family, which is that if you look at family, it's not just about culture. Culture's part of it, and family and culture, I think, have arrows that go in both directions. The family creates culture, but it also comes from culture. And we all know that from our families. There's a sort of, oh my God, my family, we're all going for Christmas now as Northern European kind of Christians. I mean, I'm an athist, but whatever. You're kind of going into this cultural, certainly in Italy.
I
was brought up a Catholic. Oh my goodness, you're really going to... And I'll have it in France.
A lot of good food, though.
Lovely good food. Very, very good food. So I suppose what I was going to say is that we need to think about not just the parents, but they're all embedded, these individuals living together. The biggest changes for people of your age are going to be when you start to have a family that's yours and not just where you come from. And that has enormous ramifications for every element of your life. When you can have a pee, when you can use the bathroom, when you can get up and go to sleep, who you can see, when you can go out, what you can eat and drink, how much you can afford to do on holiday, has ramifications across the piece.
Because I also think that then your brain maybe breaks a bit the link, from your family of origin to the new family that you are developing now.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to look at it. But also, of course, what I was going to say is that if you're living in these families where culturally you don't just live in one nuclear, weird 1950s idea of a nuclear family that was really a new proposition in the 50s. You actually, your family is like in Italy, particularly in the south, it's many generations. And even if you're not living in the same house anymore, and you probably are with some, I was brought up with my grandmother, big Catholic, French-Italian. And they, everybody, there were lots of other adults, what we call proxy parents. Yeah. So immediately you see, even if you don't have lots of wealth, you have lots of wealth and resources from other trusted adults.
Yeah,
that's true.
And here I would also have a follow-up question on this, because it seems like the argument is that the more community you have around you, if it's close family or broader family, the better embedded you are, and the less likely to develop some mental health conditions or some problems. And in the preparation to this episode, we saw that actually today a lot of young people are reporting to feeling lonely, to have this.
Yes, I saw that in your questions this morning.
And we were just wondering, do you think that this is a consequence also of the changing structures of society, of less family life?
I mean, everyone blames social media, don't they, I think, for loneliness.
That was the second question.
Everyone says, it's the teenagers because they're not seeing their friends. I mean, they're seeing their friends on social media. I would think, my sense is that we've neglected to think about the things that we can be responsible for, which is social structures. Because after all, in some ways, social media, the cat is out of the bag. I mean, I don't know how much you can control it. God knows. Are the Australians really going to stop under 16-year-olds accessing social media? No.
No, you think?
I think they'll produce a lot of data to say everything's much better. But no, I don't think they will. I think it will be very, very unreliable what they find. I think they are absolutely determined to find the answer they want. And that's what we will be shown. But I suspect the truth will be something a little murky. But anyway, that's totally separate. But yes, I think. Look, I grew up in a family with hundreds of children around, and couldn't think of anything nicer than to be on my own with my book or quiet. But if I didn't have that, and if I were, in fact, my partner was an only child until he was 11. And he loved having 4 parents, or 3 parents. His mother, who was very young when she had him, and then her parents, they all lived together. He loved that. And then suddenly he had to share when his mother married. But terrible. But no, I think you're right. I think family structure is your, if you like, template for the world, for socialization.
But also talking about like emotion and happiness, recently was published this very long-term Harvard studies across, I think it was around 70 years, following people across different generation and asking them
and you have the U-shaped curve.
Exactly. But then also the most important predictor of happiness is social interactions, indeed. No, is to have friends, is to have deep bonds.
I think you're absolutely right. And whether you get those through a combination of in-person or online, I think the world is changing. I do think in-person. So, look, in-person, I did some early work on oxytocin years ago. You just have to touch somebody, or a mother with a new baby just has to be touched, and the oxytocin rises and you feel good. I mean, look, it's absolutely clear that we're built, and it's about protecting, we're built to live in groups and have social hierarchies and to stick in those, and, our stress axes respond to where we are in the hierarchy. These are really important for our physiology and our physical well-being. Absolutely. And I think the whole reason the Chinese box experiment was essentially, we call it solitary confinement for a reason. It's a punishment, but because it really makes people feel ill.
What is this Chinese box experiment?
It's called the Chinese black box, and what they did was essentially put people in a sensory deprivation setting. There was no sound, no light, 24 hours, and no humans. I think they were fed. And after, a number of days, I can't remember exactly the time period, but it was very, very, it was a kind of a torture. It was very consistently, people started to develop hallucinations. Now that's interesting because, of course, those hallucinations presumably are about keeping you company in some way, cognitively.
It's a defense mechanism.
I mean, it could be, maybe it is. Maybe. I mean, but anyway, they start to hear voices and they start to see things and they start to hallucinate.
But then here, what I would like to understand is that if these indeed social bonds are important for well-being and the society gets towards an individualistic direction, particularly in the West, like, do we need also a cultural change in this regard to improve the mental health?
Yeah, we need to change our housing so that we don't build high-rise small apartments, that we have, communities, and that we have shared resources like they have in Scandinavia. In the apartments, they all have a shared sauna, shared washing facilities. Cool. And the elderly experiments in Norway and Sweden with the elderly, where they have elderly people with students and they have shared kitchens and they all eat together, or they can if they want, So I absolutely think there's a role for, most people I know don't live let alone the same street as their family anymore, in the same town or the same country.
Like us, yes.
Like you, There's so much, and that's wonderful in many senses, but it's also isolating. Supposing you decide to have children with a partner, then you don't have your parents, it would have been your mother, to look after, to help you.
By these impacts, yes.
It has, there's a huge economic, but not only economic, just, if you like, emotional support that you get from that kind of, community that's built.
On this, I totally agree. But I also think that is the perception of emotional fulfillment and well-being that as well needs to change. Because I think it can also be tied in the West very much on materialistic achievements, like job achievements, financial achievements.
It's the patriarchy, mate.
Okay.
The patriarchy has told us that all of these things are what we should be aiming for.
But that's a bit the in brackets.
Now you see what you're doing with.
After 1 hour. No, but that's a bit in bracket the possible scam, because then it has been also proved by...
I mean, it's the capitalist patriarchy. Yeah. What can I say? Look, I think you're right. It's crazy.
You are like a rat, because then you follow things that...
The rat race, as we say.
You chase things that you think that make you happy, but then it's...
And then you have miserable fathers who feel they hardly saw their children growing up, or they have very difficult relationships with their children because they don't feel they know them, or their children feel uncomfortable, and they try to make it up as grandparents, which is great because you can give them away at the end of the day. Kind of thing. It's like a puppy that you borrow,
Yeah, and just one last point on this is that also, like, they compare very interestingly the Western culture with the Chinese culture, Indian culture, and the level of anxiety, depression rates in the West is way higher.
Northern wealthier,
Because I think also there the sense of community is stronger, and the life achievements are not so materialistic in the West.
So the best mental health and it's a funny thing in Europe. So you've got different data which show worse mental health worse rates of depression in Italy in southern regions, but lowest rates of suicide in Italy and southern regions. Interestingly,
I think because suicide in the south of Italy is seen as the ultimate gesture of weakness. Traditionally, it's
really?
I think it's very.
It's very anti-Catholic, also.
Yes, and I think it's also really seen as something extra. For how bad it is, it's seen as something very weak. So even I think it's better to do the gesture. I think it's really also you have a lot of social stigma around that you do not have in Northern Europe.
I mean, I think that's quite interesting. You don't have the idea that there could be or couldn't be social stigma around something like suicide, that we would think about it like that, but I'm sure you might be right. Anyway, where should we go now?
I wanted to switch a bit subject and to go to your personal career a bit.
Okay.
I'm curious, what brought you to the topic of mental health originally?
So, in fact, I worked for a long time. I did medicine in university, and then I went to medical school to do the clinical side. So I always did medicine. I come from a very, very medical family, all surgeons, even my grandmother. So I was going to be a surgeon, of course. And when I became a psychiatrist, they thought I wasn't a doctor anymore. Psychiatry is...
Doesn't count.
No, it doesn't. And really, it was seen as... You have to remember that when psychiatry was born in the early 20th century, it's the newest, really, of the medical specialties. it was just seen as you were psychiatry's policeman. You were society's policeman, because you couldn't do anything. There were no treatments. You just put somebody in a straitjacket in an asylum, and hopefully the asylum was far away from a town and far away in the countryside where nobody else was, because nobody wanted the lunatics around them. Yeah. And so that's why you see, and they were built by prison architects, so they all look like prisons. All of the big ancient old. And the Salpêtrière is a lovely story from, I can't remember the name of the journalist from the New Yorker magazine. And he went to the Salpêtrière, very, very famous, the birth of psychiatry. Charcot was a famous neurologist there, and he would deal with all of the cases that nobody could explain. He was a neurologist. So all they do, neurologists, is they make diagnoses. They do all of their very fine examination, and they can tell you where the lesion in the spinal cord or the central nervous system is. It's the central, the peripheral. And they can say exactly where the problem is with their tapping and can you feel all this. Anyway, and he would collect cases that he couldn't diagnose. It will be apparent why I'm telling you the story. And he would have lots of interns because he was the most famous neurologist. There was no psychiatry. And both Jung and Freud went to be his. And every time he had these interns, he would give them all the cases, the people who couldn't walk, but there was nothing wrong with their neurology that he could find. And he didn't understand why they couldn't walk, or they couldn't talk, or they had some weakness or some neurological symptom, but there was he couldn't find where the lesion was. And really, in some senses, that's the birth of psychiatry, I guess. So, in the 50s, this New Yorker journalist, we should find out who he is, I can't remember, he came to the Salpêtrière because he'd heard about this famous hospital. And they famously had a ward, a psychiatric ward. And it was right at the top. It's in the middle of Paris, the Salpêtrière. And he was in the grounds. It's a huge, beautiful place. It was in the grounds of this building. And as he got closer and closer and closer and was walking up the stairs, it got louder and louder. He could hear the noise. And it was this very awful noise of human suffering. And he walks in, and it's sort of cuckoo's nest, this kind of stereotype of people in straitjackets rocking like this and screaming and shouting and And he went back there after 1952, in the late 50s, when they'd introduced chlorpromazine, the first medicine, antipsychotic. It's essentially a major tranquilizer. That's all it is. Very crude. And the most striking difference was that he couldn't hear anything when he walked up to the ward, and nobody was wearing a straitjacket. But what he saw were lots of silent people walking around with Parkinson's symptoms as a side effect from the tranquilizer, the side effect of blocking the dopamine system. And I mean, that's an extraordinary thing. Anyway, so I was always very interested in the psychotropic medicines. And when I was a registrar in medicine it was a big research hospital in London called the Hammersmith Hospital. It's postgraduate medical. I was always doing research. And I got involved in a trial of a new antipsychotic, different. We'd had nothing except chlorpromazine-like medicines. It was a new drug called risperidone. It worked on slightly different, the serotonin system as well. And I got involved in this trial, and I was so interested in this because I kept seeing exactly the same symptoms, the extrapyramidal side effects, in other words, Parkinson-like symptoms. And that was supposed to be the big difference with this drug. So it was like, anyway. And my friend said to me, she became the first female editor of the British Medical Journal. It's very famous, the BMJ, very famous, Fiona Godley. She said, you should be a psychiatrist. You should go to the Institute of Psychiatry, get a scholarship, and be a psychiatrist. And I did. And it was really, I sort of didn't really think about it. I thought, maybe I should. I didn't really think. And when I told my father, my mother, they nearly cried. They certainly tried to sway not to do it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Not to.
That's not medicine. That's a waste of time. It was bad enough being a physician, not a surgeon. Anyway, so I eventually went to the Institute of Psychiatry, where I have a visiting professorship, honorary professorship now. So that's very nice, and I work a lot. And the new dean is a very, very old friend of mine there. So, and the Institute of Psychiatry is a really interesting place. It is the biggest, apart from the Max Planck There are various
really?
different Max Plancks in Germany. It's the biggest in the world focus of neuroscience, psychiatry, psychological medicine research. Plus a huge clinical population.
Okay.
And it's the Maudsley Hospital, which is famous, and the Bethlehem, which is the old Bedlam. So very, very, it's got this wonderful tradition. And, you know, when you're at the Bethlehem, you see the wards where women were placed at the Bethlehem because they had a child and they weren't married.
Oh God! Okay.
So it's, you know, it gives you this extraordinary kind of, I think, context of our struggle to understand the difference between mental illness and a health problem that needs medical approaches and just a social something we don't want to think about.
Yeah, and I think one of the coolest thing of this path that you decided to take is that you studied a subject that developed so much in the recent decades.
Yeah, it's really lucky.
Huge improvements,
huge changes.
But also, like myself, that I'm interested, but I'm not an expert like you. Like also these, for example, you can say personality disorder, like mental health, like the awareness and the understanding improve massively.
I mean, I think awareness and understanding that we can say something is an illness and it's not someone's decision to behave in a certain way or to have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, the more serious mental illnesses. I think that's all, and that we shouldn't be, you know, people are frightened of people with schizophrenia, and I understand that. But, you know, my clients are much more at risk of being killed than they are of killing anyone else. Okay. But you hear in the press, you always hear, oh, he's got mental illness.
Of course, yeah.
But what I think at the same time as we've developed a much, you know, we don't have to, we close down the asylum, and people live in a community among us,
which is
fantastic.
Of course,
we just talked about socialization. But also we've got worse at thinking about other aspects of health and mental well-being.
And one thing, like how studying psychology impacted your life, because I think then you are more aware of, for example, I don't know, it's not that you are a robber, like, you know, you feel an emotion, you know, that can be due to this, you are how it impacts a person's life being an expert in psychology. Like, so
I'm really an expert in psychiatry as opposed to psychology, which is slightly different. Psychologists have a much deeper understanding of a certain range of mechanisms than I would, for example, and techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy that I wouldn't. But, you know, I guess it's a bit like being a doctor, or, you know, if you're an architect, you walk into a building and it looks different to you than it does to you or me, maybe. If you are in the European Commission working on policy and you hear a politician speaking about, I don't know, climate change, you hear that and you think, oh yeah, I know what he really means. You hear things differently. As a doctor, I see if somebody's face is asymmetric. I can't help it. And as a psychiatrist, I'm sorry guys, but you know, how much time have we spent together? You know, the damage is done.
It's all too late.
Last episode.
No, but I mean, of course, what you end up doing is, particularly in some situations, well, you have skills that allow you to manage people who are in a great deal of distress in such a way that you don't involve your own distress and your own problems. And that's incredibly important and not something which most doctors do. But also it allows you to think about things clearly and hopefully help somebody. A lot of what we do in psychiatry, behavioral medicine, is really to guide people to a treatment plan that's best for them.
And did your professional background influence the way you were taking care of your own mental health?
Well, I saw an analyst for 12 years. It took me a very long time. I saw 2 or 3 before I found one. Okay. And it was all my children's fault that I really stopped eventually, as everything. Well, I did take my first baby. I took her, and luckily my friend lived across the road from my analyst, so I would leave my 3-month-old baby with my friend, who also had a 3-month-old baby, and then I would come back after 50 minutes and pick her up. But I felt guilty the whole way through, so all of my session was dealing with my maternal guilt and Kleinian problems with the breast.
I see.
Anyway, but no, I think, look, I mean, I'm actually interestingly thinking about needing to go back and see therapists, thinking, I'm moving on to the next phase of my life. Actually, it might be really helpful to it's always helpful, I think.
And at the moment, what are you working on?
So at the moment, the majority of our work is really thinking about child and adolescent mental health trends.
Okay.
It is also the family network analyses using large data sets, different data sets, survey data sets, and maternal mental health, the reproductive and sexual health of particularly women with mental illness, but also men. So it's all, if you like, circling around quite similar things. And also trying to get a self-harm, an intervention for self-harm, repeat self-harm into women's prisons in the UK in a way that's affordable and sustainable by the system over time. So it's a digital format that we've developed over 15 years. And since the pandemic, we were in the middle of a randomized control trial. We had to stop it. And we haven't restarted it yet. So we're still trying, because we want to convert it to digital. And there's a lot of concern about that. So those are the things I'm working on in relation to the, if you like, research. And we haven't talked at all about data or the mental health research infrastructure. And that's really what the government work is. It's to try to create really fantastic products that make innovators, both digital and pharmacological innovators, come and use the data sets, particularly in the UK, but also linked to European. There are lots of European. I'm in January. I'm in where am I? Amsterdam, to meet lots of European colleagues, to try to create data sets, including lots of biological samples, for something called precision psychiatry or precision medicine, personalized medicine.
And
so that's, I think, the future of how we'll think about things.
And they're talking about precision and innovation. Does, for example, online psychological support or social media psychological support, in your opinion, is a positive innovation that can replace physical psychological support?
You know what? I think if I just have one answer, it's yes, definitely. And the reason that is that it allows so much broader access to innovation, to intervention. And also, of course, your generation and beyond are so, used to seeing and consuming things digitally. You don't need to go to the cinema or even have a TV. You just watch it on your screen. And it's absolutely the case that the evidence shows, particularly for psychological things, and particularly for more common mental disorder and obsessional things, panic, phobias, all that kind of stuff, it works just as well as in person. But we need to personalize things. So there are some times where you need to see somebody. You can deliver huge amounts of sexual health education, and indeed you can run lots of sexual health clinics for people who wouldn't, with mental illness, for example, who wouldn't normally come to the clinic. For all sorts of reasons, they're not well, and you can't get them, but you could actually give them a huge amount of intervention in their homes. But you need at some point to have an in-person appointment to do a swab or to examine them physically. So, to give them an IUD, whatever it is. Intrauterine device. So, there are lots of things. You need to personalize things.
Because also indeed social media, it is mentioned a lot, the negative impact on mental health, but it can be also immensely powerful tool as well to spread awareness and support. A
large report that was led by Matthias Pierce, who's somebody that I work closely with and have done for 10 years already. We just finished this large report for the Youth Futures Foundation, looking at the trends in youth mental health over the last 30 years and looking to see where the potential mechanisms might be in all the different causes that people have suggested, whether it's climate anxiety or social media or exam pressures. And really the biggest positives are that social media effects, well, they're not very well looked at. The research is pretty ropey. It's not very robust. But probably the effects are quite small. However, if you've got something that's across the whole population, even a small effect can have quite a big impact. So we do need to still think about this. But I don't think it's the case that, and we'll see from the Australian experiment, although, as I said before, I'm not sure we will really see. I think we'll see aversion. And also I think it'll be unreliable because I don't think I'm going to believe that these under 16-year-olds are not consuming social media.
Also, there which social media? Like all social media, YouTube?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I mean, lots and lots of countries, including here, and lots of different schools in different countries have made decisions that, you know, you have to put your phone in your locker.
Also in Italy.
You know, so there are lots of places where you can you know, get rid of social media during the school day. But actually banning social media for under 16-year-olds, I just cannot see that that's ever going to happen.
Okay, so because there are 2 points, no? Like first is the likelihood of such a ban actually working, but the other thing is also like
happening.
Yeah. But the other point is whether if it happened, if it would have an impact then, no?
Yes, or what it would have an impact on, how you'd measure that. And you know, you need to think, because it's not going to be, well, I mean, it's a bit like rain in some ways. Of course, rain wets everybody.
Yeah.
But of course, some people have got umbrellas, some people have got rain shoes, and some people have got Macs, and some people have got all three. And so these interactions between these resilience factors, a large part of which I think is the family. So, you know, effects where you see family being able to moderate social media use or being able to moderate the influence of, you know, it's like, I feel if my kids leave home and they make bad decisions, that's partly my fault because they should have been given enough by me to know what decision to make in a situation.
So it sounds a bit like you're saying that, at least in your view, social media would not be the root cause of a problem, but rather an amplifier. Maybe
I think it's likely to be a moderator, what we might say.
Okay.
It could be in some circumstances a mediator. So, for example, with eating disorders, it could mediate worsening because it allows girls to get onto these weird anorexic websites. I can't remember what they're called. Anna websites, I think they're called, where they look at ways of stopping their parents seeing them eating. I don't know what it is, you know. So I think it could act in different ways in the causal pathway, if you like.
Interesting.
But we need to be aware of that.
No, very, very interesting, because I think, let's say, popular science is moving a bit in the direction of, blaming social media for
we all
many,
want simple answers.
You
know.
But you would not...
And also, I would say this, is that, of course, if the parents are worried or even have a subconscious concern that their own mental health is a problem, or that they might have, because undoubtedly... Who is it? Certainly in the UK, and I think it's the same here, there are youth clinics, which are slightly different in Sweden, where kids do take themselves for things. But generally, and they can go from, I think, 12 to 22 years of age. These are called the youth hubs, youth clinics. But generally, in most countries, teenagers, these are the group we're talking about over 12, let's say, post-puberty, if they're developing mental health symptoms, what are they doing? They're not saying, well, I must go to my GP. Let's go and hang out at the GP. No, they're going online, or they're going to speak to their friends, or I don't know what they're doing, but they're not going to the GP. And they're not coming to services. The people who are bringing them to services, is usually their mothers are bringing them to services. So the mother is presenting the child as the problem. And as I said before, I don't think that's where we should be looking. We should be looking at the environment, i.e. the family, where the child has been. And so, therefore, it's a very good way of saying, not my responsibility, it's social media. It's that terrible lot of, entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley.
Here, I think, talking about simple answers, indeed, it's a bit a digression, but it also applies a bit also to, there was a lot of criticism to cinema. For example, also in Italy, there was a very famous crime series by Roberto Saviano, I don't know if you know, and he was heavily criticized, saying, okay, this...
Violent.
This series... influence young people to commit crimes, but it's easy to blame the series. It's a person that is already inclined to commit a crime. Course. And that the same, I think it applies to social media. Like if you have a tendency to isolation, a tendency to anxiety, can exacerbate, but the issue is already there, no?
I mean, there's a funny thing in Europe right now, which is being criticized heavily for being great regulation. and not great at actually doing stuff. So there's no big social media company based in Europe, is there? But we've got the EU's got all of the regulation it can possibly want and more, and it will produce far more. So I mean, I think the thing is we need to take a little bit of responsibility, and I think that starts in the family and the home. And so we should be educating not the children but the freaking parents. Excuse my French. The parents need to grow up, take responsibility for their children. What their children, not only what they see, but what they see when they see something. A bit like if they're watching one of those Silviani episodes, then you're with your parents and the parents are saying, well, you do know this is like just a telly series, or, these are freaky people. If you ever come across, don't get in a car with a stranger. I mean, whatever it is. Exactly. I suppose, and I think the other thing is that, we can't spend our entire time being victims of social media. We need to be intelligent, and we need to make and help our children to make, and our parents to make choices about how we use that social media. Because as you said, there's a lot of positive stuff.
Of course.
I mean, it's fun, like AI. It's just, now the whole thing is going to be AI is a problem.
I think the issue is that, now maybe a bit more, but overall, at least in the last years, there's not been a lot of awareness. Know that it may not be super good to spend all your time online, and to if you have issues, to not go to a JP, as you said, or to get help. And I think maybe this awareness is growing a little bit. But maybe social media is still a huge temptation,
Yeah, I mean, look, I remember really wanting to spend a lot of time in my bedroom, and I didn't have a telephone in the 1960s, but but the point is that yeah, exactly. But I mean, the fact is, I would have loved to have had something online. The thing is, I guess I always came down to help cook and for meals, and and I always had to get engaged. There were no choices. It doesn't matter how annoyed I was or wanted to read this book. I had to do various things, and I knew that, and there were rules and regulations in the family. Now, it seems to me that if parents are exhausted and don't have enough resources to have all of the additional help in the home that the wealthy have, so you can farm out, you can buy in grandparents and mothers, and you can buy in additional adults into your nuclear family if you're wealthy. And boy, do the wealthy do that. They have endless nannies and mannies and tutors and God knows what. So you can buy in resources, and I think we need to do that on a grander scale in communities, buy in resources to support parents and children as families, not saying you need this because you're in your bedroom all the time. But of course, in adolescence, you're very antisocial often. I mean, I certainly was quite antisocial.
I don't know if
well, you may not have been a lovely, not antisocial person, but, I was just sort of irritable and I hated all the boys. They were annoying, I think it's very easy. And adolescence is the time where you're very, hyper-conscious and, very egocentric, very hyper-conscious. And I think, if parents become frightened of their children, in part as a response to their own guilt trip, they haven't spent any time with their kids. No. They don't know what their kids are doing. They're not really interested in what their kids are doing because they're kids. They're not really interested. That's fair enough. But, do you really want to know? I mean, it's understandable. It's really understandable. It's quite boring, Anyway, but the fact is that I think there needs to be more of a discussion about, rather than pathologizing childhood anxiety, adolescent angst. We used to call it teenage. Now we call it mood disorder. Or depression or something. Funnily enough, the one thing that's really going down, apart from suicide in Europe, is conduct disorder.
Conduct?
Conduct disorder is essentially quite young children, usually boys, behaving very badly.
Okay, but badly means like robbing?
Refusing to do things, being oppositional defiant was the thing. Okay. They refuse to do it. No,
it's going down.
It's going really going down.
They're tranquilized by the phones.
Well, no. What's going up is diagnosis of attention deficit. So they're not oppositional and defiant, and they need behavioural interventions. They've got a brain disorder, and they need drugs, amphetamines. I mean, it's an and that's very absolving for the parents in some ways, because of course the parents felt obliged to take responsibility for a defiant oppositional child, even if that could have had brain problems too, autism, lower IQ, I don't know, all sorts of things, anxiety, who knows. Whereas, the way in which we're thinking about these things is changing, and that's allowing us to not take responsibility. The more brain disorder it is, the more
yes, my fault.
Just give them a drug. It's a medical problem.
And here I'm wondering, since you're mentioning the drugs, how do you view it? This, like, at which stage is the use of drugs? Is it positive? When is it too early?
I mean, I worked my whole sort of PhD with psychopharmacology of schizophrenia, but medications have a huge role to play in proper mental health. But again, I think, at the moment, the way we use them is way too crude, because we simply, to be perfectly honest, we don't know what depression is. It's not about an abnormality in brain chemicals. We don't really understand schizophrenia. It's not like a neurological disorder where we can see where the lesion is. It's not even that we don't understand it like we don't understand dementia, because at least in dementia we know that there are various different key causes that we can see in the brain. We really do not know. If you look at a brain of somebody with schizophrenia, you can't say that person has schizophrenia and that person doesn't. There isn't a pathognomic signature in the brain. Now, there might be at a microscopic or cellular level that we haven't discovered, or molecular level that we haven't discovered. I'm not saying that there isn't a brain disorder. But so our medicines and our theories that have driven the development of these medicines is incredibly crude. And that's why we started with major tranquilizers. Fantastically good for the noise control. Yeah,
but not very...
But, no, I mean, look, so there are a couple of things. Many of my patients would say, they've saved their lives. They couldn't live because they couldn't live with the hallucinations. So that what that these drugs do is they dampen everything down.
Like Xanax, for example, for anxiety.
I mean, Xanax is a minor tranquilizer, different to the antipsychotics, but it's a similar kind of, it's a benzodiazepine. But, we don't understand what depression is, and we treat everybody with this diagnosis, which is very crude, the diagnosis. You just have to have a certain number of symptoms, and one person with depression over here may only share one or two symptoms with all of the people over here, who may share one or two with all of the people over here. So depression, all of these things, mental and behavioural disorders are syndromic. They're not really very fixed. You have things like panic disorder or OCD. Some of those things are much clearer. They really tend to look very similar. PTSD also looks very similar. One person with PTSD and the other. I mean, there's not a lot. But things like depression, anxiety, they're so varied. And what we need to understand more is at the molecular level, biological level, and psychosocial level, we need to understand what they look like. And the only way we'll be able to do that is if we can have very, very large data sets with lots of different measurements that get included, including brain imaging and blood, etc., etc. And that's where we'll get to. And then we could ask the innovators to develop medicines for people who've got this cluster of symptoms.
More data, yes.
Versus this cluster. And we won't say depression, we'll say anhedonia, something else, or blue eyes, purple teeth, as opposed to green teeth, green eyes.
That's
I don't
true,
know.
because then you have different, for example, among the depression, for example, macro cluster, probably you have things that are not depression.
Yes, so we may get quite different targets, which might mean that you can then do what we call platform trials, like we did for COVID. We said, we don't know how to treat COVID. We've got a few ideas. We'll randomize everybody who comes into the hospital with COVID. And because we don't know how to treat you, you just get randomized to one of 6 treatments, right? 6 different medicines.
Yeah.
And then because there were so many, they within a few weeks could see that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. So that gets thrown off the platform and something else gets put on, or a different combination of things. And that's the kind of thing that we need to do once we understand more about the different types, phenotypes, much more deeply phenotyped individuals with these psychological presentations. So, the future for me is not diagnoses and better diagnoses, but actually thinking about people and their lives personalizing and precision medicine, precision psychiatry, and symptom-based treatment. So what is it that bothers you the most?
Yeah.
So maybe they've got a whole load of symptoms, but they say, that's fine, I like my hallucinations, I like my voices, they keep me company. I don't like people, but I like my hallucinations. What I can't deal with is the poor sleep or the low mood or whatever.
Yeah, sounds like there is still a lot of research to go into this area, no?
As they always say, more research needs to be done.
More research needs to be done, but of course, like there also to come back a bit to the role of government. Also, there needs to be the framework for this. No, there needs to be sufficient funding. Do you feel that?
Well, I mean, look, I'm really lucky right now because I'm in control of huge amounts of funding from the UK to do exactly these things that I've wanted to do for a long time.
Okay.
So blowing apart diagnoses, grabbing all the data that we can, funding big cohorts with lots of biological data collection, linking it all to the electronic, clinical records, joining up with our German and Dutch and European counterparts with their data sets, making sure all the data are actually interoperable, using the sort of technical systems that allow us to make them interoperable, creating governance that's not just appropriate for the EU but actually for Europe and the States, allowing big companies, even if it is American, to come in with a proper framework and access these, because they're separate intelligence systems and fantastic innovators. We need the nasty pharmaceuticals, as some people call them. They are billion-dollar organizations that are, within them have fantastic individuals who they're not interested in the money. They're proper scientists who really want to create solutions for hard problems in health. And they have done that with cancers. People live with cancer. We want that same kind of molecular approach for mental illness, mental health symptoms, psychological disorder, whatever we want to call it, behavioural disorders. We want to be able to bring that in. We want to know how best to link treatments for people with multiple long-term conditions, the majority of which will have a series of mental health problems.
Yeah, because there I think one thing to convince, in brackets, politicians and governments is talking about numbers and economics. And I think we want to touch upon also health economics, in the sense in the European Union, mental health cost-related is around 600 billion per year, so 4% of the UGDP.
4%, that's exactly the figure I had. I'm just going to my... This is when you said the notes. Aligned, we probably looked at the same data.
So there I think we really lack awareness, like in
of the economic costs.
Yes,
do you mean?
And also like a mentally health society can lead also to economic growth.
I mean, it's absolutely the case that there's something in England they're called NEETs, not in employment, education or training. And we've seen vast increases in this population, and they're all young. They're all under 25, and there are many, many young women.
What is the number?
I didn't know. We'll have to ask AI. I'm sure it will let us know. I'll ask one of Gemini or something. Anyway, and Claude do you use here? I don't know. But they're sort of, clearly, not only is the fertility, the population in decline in terms of fertility, and that is, we can have another conversation about fertility and mental health in families, and if women were given more, better support. So those, one of the other problems we didn't talk about is the fertility of those women is reducing in those families where they're doing too much homework as well as outside work.
Very interesting. We had an episode a couple of months ago about demographic
so you'd increase
trends,
fertility and productivity and growth if you supported mothers and families. That's what I'm saying. So there's a link between the economics of women's lives and their fertility in families. Anyway, but if we just think about what was I talking about? What were we talking about before we talked about
the 4% GDP? No.
Yes,
exactly. 4% GDP.
The impact of mental health on economic growth.
Yes. So I was talking about. We were talking about the NEETs, weren't we? So that group, if you're not in work by the age of 25, then your chances of being in work subsequently just gets lower and lower. So you're creating not only a population who's not working, but you've also got a problem because you haven't got enough young people to support all of the old people who want a pension. And in France and the UK, it's triple locked. It's inflation linked. So the pensioner, it's the first time that pensioners' salaries are greater than working people's salaries.
Crazy.
Because of this pension thing. So we're draining. I'm about to be a pensioner, by the way. So we're draining all of your resources. Yeah, you're going to work till you're 70.
We just started work.
Yeah, you're going to have several careers, by the way. It's not just the one. So it's a real problem, this lack of productivity through mental ill health.
Exactly.
And we have, endless people saying, "Oh, I've got mental health." And, it's tragic. Young people, they should be the fittest in all sorts of ways and the happiest. If you normally look at that curve, it's the happiest. Before you have children, it's the happiest time. And when you've left your family, you look at all of the curves. The happiest group is the kids who've left home and before they have children, and then
so it's our face. No,
you get. Remember what I said before? Children make you miserable. They're the most wonderful thing. They are the most wonderful thing you will ever do, having children, in my experience. But it's the burden of all of these things in the modern life without all of your family around. So it's a real problem economically. It's an incredibly, not only is it a huge cost to society, but the cost to these, we talk about suicide, but suicide is rare, but this is becoming increasingly common. And you just have to think, this is just, you only have one life, unless you believe in thousands of lives. But literally, just these kids need to be shaken somehow and said, we need to find out what's going to work for you, because this is it. You are 20 now. You don't know what, you're only 20 once. You look the best you're ever going to look, and you'll feel the best. You have the most energy and the most ability to drink alcohol and not matter.
That's important.
And do you understand? To really, enjoy life in a way that you can't subsequently. So it's a real loss, a huge cost to those individuals, as well as to population.
It's a two-way street, no? Also, maybe mental health influencing ability to work, and unemployment may also then influence back.
Most people think, and most of the literature, obviously I'm not an expert in this, but the bit I've read, and it may be that this is the way they've wanted to look at it, but in most cases that I've seen, work is good for mental health. Now, most of that has been done in people of what we call working age, so under 45s. Hello, if only. But the fact is that, of course, what we're talking really about there is some of these are quite old studies. So we haven't talked about how the pandemic in particular has changed people's working lives, and particularly your generation's working lives. My daughter rarely goes into, they barely have an office.
Okay. Yeah.
And a lot of the people she works with work all over the country, and they come down once a month for a meeting together. So she misses out on finding her boyfriends or girlfriends or partners or, her social group. I'm not saying everybody always socializes and finds their partner at work, but it's really important as a place for meeting people, particularly if you work somewhere like the European Commission and you guys just came back from work. And it means that, you have that social connection. You have to find it. It's just there.
We met. We book.
Yeah. So, look, I think that's, again, we've talked about the breakdown of community in relation to family and intergenerational families and communities. But I think there's also another question of the breakdown of community in relation to the workplace for modern generations now.
And in your honest assessment, is our generation less happy than, for example, your generation during your 20s, we are just now
I think the very first time that happiness isn't mental health, it's not the same. So you can have a serious mental illness like schizophrenia and be happy.
Okay.
So it is not the same. It's really important to make that distinction. And also you can be mentally healthy, not have a mental illness, and be miserable. Yeah. And you're not unhappy.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, you don't have to be ill.
So
the happiness surveys that show that consistently U-shaped curve across the world for years and years and years and years and years, every time it's been done, I think for the first time they're now showing, I don't know which exact generation, whether it's your generation. Are you Gen Z? What are you?
I don't understand anything.
You're millennial.
I'm Gen Z. Are you Gen Z?
You're 96.
Yeah. Anyway,
1 year makes a difference.
I'm not sure which one of the generations is now showing, is it Gen Alpha, I can't remember what they're called, is now showing a dip for the first time compared to, of course, guess who's getting happier? It'll be the boomers.
Yeah,
really?
so,
Because we're so rich and we only work for 30 years. Not me, but look, I think I don't really know the answer to that. I still think there's a big opportunity to make sure, given that there's a predisposition clearly built in for that part of your life, for you to be very happy then, for that to be restored. And for us to take control of things that might do that, or things that we think are threatening that.
Okay. Also, what I was interested in, and this, of course, you said happiness does not relate indeed to mental health specifically, but I think there is also a bit a misconception that, like in the daily life of a person, like happiness in the end is not the majority, no? So I think, does this contribute a bit to anxiety, in your opinion, the fact that there is this expectation of being happy most of the time?
I mean, I don't know, maybe people would say, with social media, people only post positive stuff, when everything's fabulous, and it doesn't really relate to reality. But of course, I mean, there are all sorts of things in your brain and body that make sure you wake up in a good mood. One of them is called cortisol, and the other is prolactin, and it wakes you up. And, generally one of the key questions we ask to make diagnoses of depression is about, diurnal mood variation. So we know that when your cortisol is highest first thing in the morning, you generally, because steroids are great at making you feel really great, they're euphoriants. And they wake you up and make you feel perky and motivated to get on with your day. I mean, that's part, presumably, of how we've been built to survive. Get up with the light, and it's all about sort of light sensitivity and seasonal variations. And we get seasonal variations in mood. We have something we call seasonal affective disorder, SAD. And that's all to do with this kind of variation. Yeah. So, I mean, my sense is that, in general, when I ask people about their mood, one of the questions is, and it's a common question you ask in a psychiatric interview, you say, over the past month, on average, where 0 out of 10 is the worst you've ever felt and 10 out of 10 is the best, how have you felt on average over the past month? And most people say, 7, 8. Most people
classic,
do. They just do. And people who are really depressed either say nothing, or they say I don't know, or they will say 3 or 2. But you've already known by the time they've answered that question, because you've seen in their features and their inability to the flatness of their affect, and all sorts of other elements of their physiology, that something's really wrong. And they're not putting it on. So, I mean, I think happiness is a part of experience in the same way that sadness is a part of... You can't feel one without the other. You can't. We all know about depression, not schizophrenia. It's very understandable. If somebody says they're depressed, you've got a sense of what that means, because we've all, if I were to say to you, would you like to wake up in the morning depressed or happy? What would you say to me?
I would say happy.
Yeah, because you've got a sense of what it feels like to be depressed, even though you may not be depressed. And these things are just built into our humanity and our understanding. And the majority of people, when you show them, there are lots of lovely, lovely experiments from the late 20th century, early 21st, with really lovely use of brain imaging. Mary Phillips, a big proponent of that, Professor Mary Phillips in Pittsburgh now. And she did these beautiful experiments where she shows this evolutionary stable state of the human existence, if you like, the human mind. And what she shows is, if you create these things called these Ekman faces, which essentially they're faces where they take all of the kind of features away. They just show the face, they're black and white, and you morph them, with a computer, between 100% sad or 100% neutral, and then you go up to 100% happy. So if you start with 100% sad, then in the middle you're neutral, 100%. If that can be 100%. And then you go up to 100% happy. And the really interesting thing is that if we just go from, say, neutral to happy, that people who are well, and the majority of people, only need 30% change towards happiness at 100% to say they're happy, to recognise that.
Okay.
So that's recognizing emotion in faces of strangers. And they're not asked directly to do that. So there are two sets of experiments. The first is they're asked directly. It's not the same group of people. But the key experiment is when she just asks, bearing in mind what I've said, they've got no features except the person. So they think this is the task. The task is to press the red button for female and the green button for male. And they're just asked to press either the red or the green button. Mm-hmm. And they're different, male, female, the whole way along. But as they go along, they're morphing. And the brain that recognizes the amygdala that responds to happiness and to facial emotion, only at 30% does it start to light up. Okay. So it's a masked, what's called a masked task. So again, the brain is set to absorb positive things. Mm-hmm. Now, when you become depressed, what she showed was that reverses, and it requires somebody, the more depressed somebody is, the more of that emotion it requires for them to see the happiness in the face, to respond to it. And of course, the really interesting thing about that is that, we talk about putting glass half full, glass half empty, different kind of states of mind or different personalities. And we talk about rose-coloured spectacles. Yeah. And what the rose-coloured spectacle suggests is that nothing in the world is changing, it's just how you look at it. So you put the rose-coloured spectacles and everything looks pink and happy.
So you would see it earlier, maybe even the positive aspects.
Yeah, so the point is that it's really how your brain, how you and your experience and where you are at that point, what's brought you to be you, which is your childhood, your family, your genes, your etc. All of that enables this general state that we go into the world to be happy. And that's very important, because otherwise all of these strangers that I passed on my journey would have been frightening and, threatening to me, because I would have been looking out for that. Oh, what's going on? And the woman, there was an older woman next to me who I'd helped put her bag on the thing because she was struggling. It's a very heavy bag. I was thinking, what are you still carrying this? Anyway, but she said, when I helped her at the end of the journey, she said, everyone has been so kind. I didn't expect everybody to be so kind. Now, we talked about loneliness before. And if you don't have social contact and have those expectations that you may build up alone of paranoia and negative outlook on life, low mood, let's say, and you changing the way your brain is appraising the world, if you don't have this positive contact that challenges that all the time, then I think you can imagine how that could lead to unhappiness and low mood, etc. And again, that will bring us back to the isolated child on social media, the algorithm only giving them nasty things.
This is a really incredibly interesting experiment showing that, for people with a depression, it takes them longer to recognize.
And antidepressants reverse it also.
Extremely interesting. And so this is the next experiment you read about, but you also do research yourself. Is there one piece of research that you yourself contributed to that you think is particularly worthy of sharing with us?
I mean, this is what I would think was really cool, and what you would think was really cool is so I mean, okay, so for the European Research Council work, we we've developed a way of imaging infants, babies, really small babies. And you can't usually put them in a scanner because they move, unless you sedate them or they're asleep, in which case you can't give them stimuli. So you can't do that kind of emotion processing task with them because they're asleep. Okay. So we've developed it's not just us, but we've used it in people's homes, etc. And we have used it as a way to try to select. You asked earlier how you could pick up things early. What we wanted to do is, there are so many children with parental mental illness, particularly after what I've just been saying. About a quarter of them, even with two parents with really serious mental illness, like schizophrenia, only about a quarter of them will develop a mental illness themselves.
Okay.
So most of them are resilient. So how do you pick up which ones you should do more for early on? And we know early intervention seems to be better, etc.
Yeah.
So we wanted to develop something that was objective, wasn't a subjective, observed thing, which is biased by all sorts of understanding, whatever. Yeah. So this kind of brain imaging indeed did pick up emotion processing difficulties and sensitivities in the infants with seriously mentally ill mothers. Compared to, they did look different compared to better, healthier mothers. And so there is the opportunity for us to use that not on its own, but to use that because you can do it. It's like an EEG. You put a cap on, it takes 20 minutes to do the test. You can do it in a clinic. You could screen the development. And what we were actually looking at was the development of vocal processing and vocal processing of emotion. So we weren't looking at visual processing, which is what Mary's experiments were doing, visual processing of emotions in the brain. This is about vocal processing. And it's about the development of speech and language. Because we know that kids who do worse with serious parental mental illness are the ones who by mid-childhood, but you've had to wait till they're mid-childhood, have lower IQ, particularly verbal IQ. So what could we do to pick it up much earlier? And what this allowed us to do was to pick up differences in infants like 9 months old. So when you learn a language, you have to learn to distinguish sounds because you pick up language by hearing. First, you have to distinguish sounds that are vocal sounds from just like any old sounds with the same pitch or frequency or other characteristics.
So chair moving around or...
Or you have to distinguish vocal sounds like a screech or a ah or a laugh or whatever from a voice. And then you have to pick up different elements in voice of angry or different emotions in voice. So we created these different elements and looked at the ability and the development. So we scanned the children aged 6 months, 3, 6, 9, and then 12 months in 2 different sets of experiments to see how they developed. And we scanned sets, again, it was interrupted, unfortunately, by COVID. So we got 2/3 of the sample. We wanted hundreds of these kids. We only got, anyway. But it's the biggest sample ever that's done in children who've got mothers with serious mental illness. And we saw differences that we could distinguish in the imaging, the development and the ability for those children, which is the first step to develop that distinction between voice and non-voice, and then between angry versus... So they're very, very good at picking up fear. Those kids picked up fear voices, fearful sounding voices, or angry voices much sooner than they picked up happy voices, whereas the kids of the well mums did the opposite.
Because the brain was more familiar, maybe?
We don't really know. It could be something to do with the way in which a paranoid ideation is set up molecularly in the
Super
amygdala.
interesting.
I really don't know. But it's pretty interesting. And I'm not suggesting that this is the definitive experiment. This is very, very early because the numbers are far too small. What we'd like to do is look at other high-risk groups of children to see again, can we pick up something that's going to distinguish poor verbal fluency, early IQ, bearing in mind what we talked about right at the beginning. So this is the time we've got to influence. IQ is fantastic. I mean, lots of people hate it, but it's fantastically good at predicting outcomes in life.
IQ?
Really good.
Okay.
Yeah, it really is good. I mean, I'm not saying the only thing you need is higher IQ, and there comes a level of high IQ like Elon Musk probably. He needs a bit more social cognition, I think, involved in that. Less autism. But anyway, so what we wanted to do is pick up a really early, before it was measured in mid-childhood, marker that we thought would be a reliable predictor of future outcomes. And
that's super interesting as a point, the one on IQ. But I'm also, in the definition of IQ that I don't remember and I don't know either, like does emotional intelligence is included?
EP and IQ, you mean emotional intelligence versus... Yeah.
Okay, in defining an intelligent person.
I mean, look, that's very much a psychological question, and I really don't know the answer to that. There's something called EQ, the emotional intelligence quotient. We really have only looked at sort of the standard IQ measures, which you can measure in infants in a range of different ways. You can give them a range of different tasks.
So I wonder how society could change if, for example, emotional intelligence is more considered also as a requirement, as a skill, as something important.
Less. Who knows? It might become so rare that it's a real skill, in the same way that the ability to hyperfocus, or to line cars up, or to do something autistic people can do with their memories. I don't know. I guess it depends on the environment in which we find ourselves and the skill set that requires to survive. So which set of skills will make us the fittest? And of course, increasingly, we are social beings. So although we always think that Darwin talked about survival of the fittest as an individual, what he was really talking about was the group. So there are lovely passages that he talks about in bird flocking. Now, what they do when they flock, birds flock because it keeps them safe from predators. But one of the birds is always at the front in those kinds of flocks, those formations. The ones on the outside don't necessarily have different wing characteristics, or they swap around a bit like a peloton. They kind of move around in order to provide advantage for the group, to keep the speed and the shape, and also to I guess for some reason that keeps them, I can't remember why, but it keeps them less likely to be killed by predators on long journeys. So I think group, it's the constituency of the group. We talk about neurospicy neurodiversity now because we've assimilated this idea that all of these skills are really valuable, and perhaps in an AI world, even more valuable. Who knows? I don't know. Swimming. We may need to swim when we're all underwater. We may need to have to swim an awful lot more. I have no idea.
But indeed, despite the importance of groups, what I also find interesting, there was another study that, for example, in top of hierarchy, like in corporate ladder, but also in politics, actually are skills that are a bit related to antisocial behavior that also leads to people being at the top of these hierarchies. How would you...
Oh, you mean tech bro type thing? Or
yes, also...
You mean having more kind of so the classic...
With the narcissist personalities as well.
Well, for in medicine, of course, I would suggest there's been a lot of criticism of poor bedside manner in surgeons, typically. Okay. Now, I would suggest, actually, if you're going to cut a living person's body open while they're there, alive... and fiddle around in their hot, bloody body and remove a tumour or, do something to them, you have to have a certain... I don't think everybody could do that. That's a good point. Many people would faint.
That's a good point.
And my family are all surgeons, and I realised when I went to university, I had my body, the cadaver, for 1 year, from 9 a.m. until midday, every day.
3 hours.
And I spent a lot of time doing the prosections because a lot of people were green, or they just were bored, or they were too lazy, or whatever. So you need to have a certain personality. You need to have mixtures of people who can... So clearly in my genes, in some way, I'm okay with that kind of thing. Or I've spent a lot of time with my family and they're a bit funny. I don't know. But I suppose surgeons, but I think you need these different skills. So I'm sure you're right that something about these personalities allows people... You have to be ruthless to be in business,
but also to be in politics, for example. No?
I think I could. I mean, I could not. I don't know how politicians
because I also like to make decisions in context of war, for example. You need to be a bit... Also, it's not if I could say that you're not emotionally intelligent, but you need to be also extremely empathic.
Yeah, exactly. You need to be able to make decisions, which means you have to neglect some person's point of view, I imagine. Leadership is about making tough decisions.
True.
I guess in the right circumstance, and also being willing to fail, because of course great leaders have failed a lot. Winston Churchill had a failed career until the war.
True. But failure also scares human beings.
Yeah,
no?
of course. And of course, we make it more scary by not seeing it as one of those things we've talked about, which is, this is one of the stressors or the challenges, not seeing it as an opportunity to get back up and learn from it. But that requires your having been told how to do that as a child, I should imagine, as well. Having somebody who says, it doesn't matter if you failed. Obviously, you're really useless at French or maths.
The mindset you can train, I guess.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's certainly something you can influence, I think.
And I think it's a big difference between the EU and the US, for example, the culture of failure, no? I think in some society, failure is more accepted as part of a process, while in others it's something that scares you, so you neither try.
So I'm not quite sure which.
I think in the United States, one of the factors behind the fact that there are more entrepreneurs in the United States than in the European Union, beyond the economic factor, is also cultural. That failing and taking risk also, with the consequence of failing, is more accepted in the US than in the European Union.
Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, it was a culture that's been created through migrancy, hasn't it? Huge diaspora of migrants from all over, who had to give up everything. Many of them, or had to be in a state of failure or start from scratch, or
that's very true.
be, being a migrant. I think must be. I mean, certainly we see now. I mean, goodness, we haven't talked about migrancy, but I mean, if you think about stressors in people's lives. Not only do we see appalling states of health, physical and psychological, in migrant communities, but also, they don't access the services available to, when they come to places, wealthy countries where there are services. There's a lovely study by my colleague in Sweden showing really poor access. So we know in obstetrics, women come very late. They turn up just as they're about to have a baby. In the UK, there's a lovely study which shows that the women who are most likely to use ambulances to come to labour, as opposed to their partner driving them, or whatever, and then taking them back because it was too early, and then taking them back again, whatever. So they come right as the baby is being born by the ambulance. They are very high risk for a whole range of poor outcomes. And increasingly we're seeing high rates of migrant women in that population. And people have used that on the right to say they just come to the UK to have their baby and use our services. And actually the facts are many of these women have been in the country for a long time, but they just don't avail themselves of, for language reasons, culture, who knows. Education, they don't access services.
But do we see that people with migratory background have, on average, a higher tendency to get mental health conditions, or this?
It's absolutely a risk factor for poor mental health. Yes, not only common mental disorder, but also more serious mental disorder. Absolutely, and we've known that in many ways. So there's really, really good data from the 20th century showing how, particularly in the Windrush generation, the second generation of, so the children of the families who came in the 50s to the UK, large black West Indian populations came over, but not only black, but primarily black West Indian populations who came over, their rates of schizophrenia, particularly in the men, were really high compared to the rates of their same-aged white who'd been born in the UK, and also compared to their contemporaries who'd stayed back in Jamaica or in the West Indies. So migrancy in and of itself is a proxy for. And also, it's a proxy not only, well, it could be, you could say, well, actually only the most wealthy can migrate, but also the most in difficult circumstances might migrate. Or migration in and of itself is very stressful. And certainly the Windrush community had a terrible time. They were treated like, the discrimination in the UK, I mean, the racism, awful.
And can you see that these tendencies are then passed down to subsequent generations?
Well, so exactly that. So if we say that it was the children of the Windrush generation, so their parents were treated really appallingly. They lived in awful poverty, terrible discrimination and racism. They were beaten by the police. They were spat at by the local. I mean, they were really, really badly treated. And you can imagine what that might have done in your family if you saw your father coming back beaten up from being outside the young black men.
Yeah.
We see those increased rates in the subsequent generation of young men. Now, part of that could be that if anything goes wrong, they're not going to go to the police, or they're not going to go anywhere near these services which are not for them. They are racist and institutionally racist as far as that family and that culture is concerned. Maybe that's a part of it, but I suspect it's complicated, and there are lots of elements to that particular story of schizophrenia in the second generation migrants from the West Indies that that feed into it. But yeah.
Kathryn, thanks a lot. I think we're slowly going towards the end of the episode. I feel that it's a topic where you can continue digging. We had so many different aspects and so many different perspectives that it would surely merit also from our side to read more into it, because it seems really interesting.
Yeah, but because usually we end up with a question to the guest, how would they move Europe? And since we discuss about mental health, like how would you move Europe towards a mentally healthier society?
I mean, you must know what I'm going to say.
Yes, but still.
You must know. Well, I mean, my feeling is that there needs to be a really concerted change in the way we support people to have children, rather than thinking that women have children and that the both economic and domestic and psychological burden falls on women, that we think about how we support people to have children, families and communities, and that we encourage, if we can't encourage intergenerational families, that we encourage community, and that we encourage community in workplace as well as in the home. But that support for families and people who want to have children, for me, is going to do the most, I think, in terms of our investment in the future for the mental health of subsequent generations who are going to support the elderly like me. So it's purely selfish.
Some return. So thanks a lot, Kathryn.
Thanks a lot.
See you soon.
Pleasure.
Ciao.
Nice to talk to you.